You have in several of your previous writings and books, and this as well, and then your own personal experience, frankly, with the United States CIA and with covert operations, is it's a world that to many Americans is still poorly understood. There are still a lot of people who don't really understand the role that the CIA has played in international affairs for a long period of time. Your book goes into good detail around the world how the US activated this arm of power during the Cold War. Was there anything as you were going through this book that you felt was particularly surprising to yourself, maybe that you didn't know as you began the research for it? Or again, lessons learned for the current administration, for those who may be in power or will be in power in the future about the use of covert action for an imperial power and to advance foreign policy in a way that no other form of power can?
Brian, you've cut to the core of my book and asked me to explain what's really original and I think and important about the book. At least one of the three main aspects of the book, the role of covert operations. um, Look, states have always had intelligence services. I mean, George Washington had spies, etc. Okay, so that's a constant in human history. But what's different about the Cold War was that because of the nuclear stalemate, um, intelligence became particularly important. Let me explain. The United States, of course, detonated the nuclear bombs in Japan in 1945, thinking that they had a nuclear monopoly that would last for all time. Well, within 4 years, uh, the Soviet Union tested its bomb, and by the mid 1950s, both superpowers were nuclear armed. And once that happened, they understood, and they learned that lesson very forcefully in the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. They understood that they'd achieved stalemate, mutually assured destruction. If if the tensions, direct tensions between the two superpowers got out of control, they would mobilize their strategic forces and they would move towards nuclear warfare, thermonuclear warfare. And both sides understood that that meant basically their total destruction. Everybody and everything would die. And they couldn't do that. To their credit, Moscow and Washington at this ultimate level were quite responsible during the Cold War. They just couldn't do that. Okay. So, yet the rivalry remained. The competition was intense, not just for power, but for ideas and a total global system. And so, where did the tensions go? How did they play out? Well, they shifted to areas that were remote from Washington and Moscow, that were less significant and more safe. And the competition not only shifted geographically, it shifted in terms of its domain from confrontation by conventional military forces, which could quickly escalate into thermonuclear war, to covert competition by agents and operatives. And that's what transformed the CIA from a small intelligence service into a co equal branch of the national security state with the Pentagon and the State Department and the CIA, which was only created in 1947, into this powerful global agency. And that made covert operations critically important during the Cold War. And by the way, the Cold War is what I call the golden age of espionage. Okay, the all the powers either created an intelligence agency or expanded. The Soviet Union, the United States, the French, the British, they all expanded their intelligence services, and these intelligence services became the one of the key forces of force projection. Now, in the United States, that happened. That broad sweep that I just gave you actually had, as history always does, specific anecdotes and incidents that led to it. Okay. Uh, in 1952, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected president of the United States. And during World War II, he had been the commander of Allied forces in Europe, and he had expended the lives of 800,000 men, died in the battle for Europe under Eisenhower's command, changing governments in just two capitals, Tokyo, getting Mussolini out, Berlin, getting Hitler out. That's what it was all about. Okay, Eisenhower knew that, right? And he was president of the United States in 1953, and there was a crisis in Iran. A nationalist, Mohammad Mossadegh, nationalized the British oil. At the Abadan refinery in the Persian Gulf had been, by the end of World War II, the biggest oil refinery in the world. Okay, and it was owned by Anglo Iranian Oil, which is now BP, British Petroleum. Okay, and the Mossadegh nationalized it, and the British tried everything, and they tried gunboat diplomacy. They went to the UN. They went to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. They lost everywhere, so they tied in with the CIA, and the CIA dispatched one man, Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, and he flew to Lebanon, and he got in a car. He put $100,000 in Iranian currency in the trunk, and by himself, he drove across the deserts of Syria and Iraq, crossed the border of southwestern Iran, and fomented a coup that overthrew Mossadegh's government and installed the Shah, not just to reign over Iran, but to rule Iran as direct power, the head of, not only head of state, but head of government. And on his way back from this great triumph, Kermit Roosevelt stopped in London, perched himself on the edge of the bed of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who always did his important work from his bedroom, and regaled him with tales of espionage daring do. And then he flew on to Washington, D.C., and he gave a presentation in the White House to Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and to President Eisenhower. And Eisenhower was stunned. Okay, how many lives had been lost to change a government in Tehran? 300. How many American lives had been lost? 0. Now, for Dwight Eisenhower, you got to remember, this is 1953. Just 8 years earlier, Eisenhower, in the greatest triumph of his career, had overthrown 2 governments, and it cost him 800,000 lives to do so. To be able to change a government with almost no loss of life seemed to Eisenhower like, it must have seemed like a miracle. Okay, and in fact, Eisenhower was then in the first year of his presidency. Over the next 7 years of his presidency, Eisenhower, a military man, a career military officer, authorized just one conventional military operation. He sent U.S. forces to Lebanon in 1958. Okay, just one. Okay, but he ordered 170 major CIA covert operations in 48 countries around the world. And this transformed the CIA from an intelligence agency designed to just report on world affairs into a covert action agency to actually not just report on change, but to make change. And it's that made the CIA so powerful and so central in the history of the Cold War.